This, the Seiko SSA303J1, is probably the best spec watch I have in my collection. So, why am I thinking about selling it? As my 2-year anniversary with the watch rapidly approaches, I kinda want to get into it and take a look at this watch on a deeper level, find out what I like about it, what I'm not so keen with, who I think would appreciate it, but ultimately, why I think it's not for me. Hi, my name is Travis, and welcome to Timescribe. I'm starting this channel with the intention of documenting my journey with watches, doing a few reviews on them, and passing on a few nuggets of information, which I think you might find interesting, and dare I say, useful. Alright, let's get into this review. This is the Seiko SSA303J1. It is part of the Seiko Presage collection of watches, which is positioned above the once venerable Seiko 5 collection, and roughly in line with the Seiko Prospects collection, with the Presage lineup offering more dress and everyday style watches. I've owned 6 Seikos, 2 older Seiko 5s, which are passed on to my dad and my brother, 2 Prospects Paddy Divers, which I still own, as well as another Seiko Presage, one of the Blue Moon designated cocktail times. This watch is the best finished and probably the best looking of all the watches I've owned. This watch screams Seiko, and not only because of the applied Seiko logo on the dial. It just has that classic Seiko styling that many of us have come to love. It has blue bevel Dauphine style hands set on a beautiful silverish dial, with very finely cut and applied silver indices. The indices at 3, 6, 9 and 12 are doubled to differentiate them from the rest. The index at 6 o'clock is halved to make space for the pointer date, the first of 2 complications which separate the 4R57 found in this watch from the ubiquitous 4R35 and 4R36 movements found in the majority of Seiko watches in this price range. The pointer date consists of a circular cutout with concentric patterning, which sits slightly below the rest of the dial. Between the cutout and the dial is a ring with black printing, alternating between odd numerals and basic strokes. A thin blue hand points to either to indicate the date. When I first got the watch, a pointer date was really novel to me, and I loved how different it was to my other watches with the date just sitting so sadly in a little window. Now, I find that it's just too small to be very useful. I often end up just checking my phone or the calendar even to find the date. The other complication which sets apart the 4R57 is the power reserve indicator, with the cutout extending from the 11 o'clock index to about 4:30. The power reserve indicator hand is a partially skeletonized silver hand, which weirdly resembles a rather famous landmark found in Paris. The power reserve indicator is a complication which I found very useful. I love it, and I wish more watches had it. If I ever see the watch running low after not wearing it for a day or two, I can just give it a little top up. Although while wearing the watch, I never find the power reserve below 40 hours. Right at the bottom of the dial are the words "Made in Japan," which is the finishing touch to an exquisite dial. I know that this doesn't really mean too much, but it is something that I like to see. It makes the watch seem a bit more authentic compared to the Seikos that are made elsewhere in Asia. Around the edge of the dial is a printed chaptering with the sub-second markings, a sporty addition to a dial that is otherwise very dressy. Overall, the dial is fantastically done with an incredible amount of depth. Whenever I wear it, I find myself just sitting and staring at this dial, googly-eyed. It's probably the best part of the watch. It certainly is the reason I bought the watch. Now to the Lume, and just have a look at this awesome Lume shot. Just kidding. There is no Lume to speak of on this watch. And this is perhaps the first of its downfalls, as I think that an everyday style watch should have at least a little bit of Lume. For a dress watch it's fine though. More on this later. Covering the dial is a flat sapphire crystal, something that is a rarity for Seikos at this price. I don't think it has any anti-reflective undercoating, but because of the silver dial and the flat crystal, you don't really need it. The watch is still fairly easy to read in most lighting conditions, and I haven't had a problem telling the time, except in the dark, of course, because once again, there is no Lume. As alluded to earlier, although the 4R57 comes from the same family of movements as the 4R35 and the 4R36, it has some notable differences. It still has an approximate 41-hour power reserve, hacking, hand winding, and a quick-set date change. But it also boasts the pointer date and the power reserve indicator. Even with those added complications, it's still a very robust movement, and even has an additional 4 jewels to help out, taking the jewel count up to 29. The movement can be viewed through the mineral glass caseback. Although not a premium looking movement by any means, you do get a Seiko branded gold tone rotor. During my almost 2 years with the watch, it's been very reliable, ticking away nicely with an average accuracy of just -4 seconds per day. Not bad for an entry-level movement. That wonderful dial and the unusual movement are set inside a vivaciously curvy case, which is another highlight of this watch. The presence of very fine brushing on top of the lugs, with a rather wide, high-polished chamfered edge, which transitions to a brushed mid-case and a chamfered undercut, helps the watch to masquerade as a thinner watch, despite it being a rather chunky boy. The lugs are very sweetly downturned, which helps the watch conform to the wrist. The non-rotating bezel has a variety of finishes as well, with a polished brushed polish alternating finish. The signed crown, another rarity for Seiko, sits at the 3 o'clock position and is a decent size with good grip. It's not of the screwed down variety, which is probably why this watch only has 100 meters of water resistance. However, for the style of watch present here, 100 meters of water resistance is not an issue at all in my books. Holding the case to your wrist is a faceted 3-link bracelet. It has solid links and solid end links, but it's only held together by pins and collars. I know some people don't really like this, but I haven't found any problems resizing any of my watches using pins and collars. The bracelet is actually really nicely done and looks really good in certain lighting conditions, where those straight edge links help to catch the light. One area where the bracelet could be improved are the end links. They don't look as good as they could, with the faux transitions between the links being quite soft. Apart from that, the end link fit is just not good enough. It shakes around like a dog after a bath. And now for the real bummer. but one which I think most people would have expected from Seiko at this price. A dirty, pressed clasp. And as if that wasn't enough, it only has 2 holes of micro adjust. I know Seiko isn't the only big brand to do this, but at this price, it's something that I really wished was better. It doesn't completely spoil it for me, but it is disappointing to see. Overall, the bracelet looks good, and it can be comfortable if you get a good fit. That, however, is a big if. Finally, let's talk about the dimensions. And for this review, I've purposely left the dimensions right until the end, as this is where you may start to realize why this stunning watch is not for me. The case size is 42 millimeters, with a lug-to-lug distance of about 49.5 millimeters, extended by the male end links of the bracelet. It has a case height of over 14 millimeters, and the lug width is 22 millimeters. Sized for my 6¼ wrist, this weighs in at just over 140 grams. On my admittedly slender wrists, this wears rather large, especially because without a diving bezel, that beautiful silver dial just looks enormous. For those who like a larger watch, or just a watch with a bigger presence, this will be great. But for others, not so much. Also, it can be a little uncomfortable, as I find it quite top heavy, and it bobbles around on the wrist unless I wear it tight, which is almost impossible to do comfortably because of the 2 holes of micro adjust. Switching the bracelet out for an alternative strap would absolutely be the way to go, to get it to be more comfortable and reduce the weight and size of the watch a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on big watches. I don't mind a larger watch too much if it meets certain criteria, those being a good level of comfort and appropriateness. In fact, I have a Seiko Samurai at a massive 44 millimeters, although I have now phased it out of my rotation as well, in favor of its smaller cousin, the Mini Turtle. But this SSA303J1 is just too ungainly for what it is. And what is that? Is it an everyday style of watch, or is it a dress watch? It is part of the Seiko Presage collection and has a very dressy dial that could belong to a dress watch, but clearly it's not. At 42 millimeters wide and 14 millimeters thick, even for those of you with huge wrists, this wouldn't sit right or fit under a shirt cuff. So it's gotta be a sports or everyday style watch, right? But it's even big for that, unless you have a wrist of at least 7 inches. And there's no lume on this watch at all. Surely, you would need a sliver on the hands at least for this to be a good option as an everyday style watch, right? And that brings us to the verdict. I just can't find where this watch sits. For those with large wrists or those who like large watches, it could be a good everyday style watch if you don't need after dark legibility and are willing to put up with a thicker than average watch. For me, this is not the watch I thought it was. Or rather, what I want from an everyday style watch now is different from what I wanted from an everyday style watch a few years ago. I can compromise on the lack of lume, but I do want a smaller sized watch. Not merely because I think it looks better, but because of the level of comfort a smaller watch provides. Comfort is something I've really come to appreciate over the past 3 years since I started in this hobby. This watch just doesn't give me the level of comfort I need from an everyday style watch. The thickness, the size, the top heaviness, the lack of micro adjusts. The worst thing about this watch is that it could so easily have been smaller. Just have a look at some other Seikos. Perhaps the Seiko Cocktail Time Power Reserves, which also use the 4R57 movement. They all have a 40.5mm case with 20mm lugs. I think if this watch had been there or thereabouts, it would have been a keeper for sure. But sadly, for me, it's not.
But what do you think? Do you think the Seiko SSA303J1 has an identity crisis? Would you wear it as a dress watch? What about an everyday piece? What's the most uncomfortable watch that you've ever dailied? Comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think. Thank you very much for watching the first ever video on Timescribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and why not, while you're at it, subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell icon. It would be greatly appreciated, as we're still starting up over here. I'm not sure when my next video will be, but it won't be too long. I can guarantee you that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the review. Until next time, bye.